everyone, today we're doing lesson 1, the quadratic formula. This is another way to solve quadratics. Last week we learned about factoring and completing the square as a way to solve quadratics. Today we're learning the last method of the quadratic formula. This is a formula that's given to you. You do not need to memorize it. It is a long formula, but we just plug everything in using parentheses and we solve it that way. So let's get started with our notes.
I'm in the week of 5-11 folder. So we're going to go to the Monday lesson, lesson 1. Now I've stopped linking the lesson notes through today's plan because I had a lot of issues last week with the link not working. So you can access the assignment right on the Monday folder right here. So click that and it will take you to your lesson for the day. So we are on lesson 1, the quadratic formula. So our learning target for today is I can solve quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is right here. Might even make that a little bit bigger so we can see it clearly. This formula you do not need to memorize because it is on your reference sheet. It kind of looks intimidating at first, but I promise you it's really not that bad. So to solve a quadratic, again, we did this last week. So to solve a quadratic means to find out where the parabola hits the x-axis. And that's where y equals 0. So we have so far learned to solve quadratics by looking at the graph and just figuring out where the parabola hits the x-axis. We have also learned how to factor solve. We factor it and then we make a t-chart, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. And we also learned how to solve by completing the square or getting it into vertex form. So this is the last method by using this formula. So we're going to just go through these steps together. So our first step is to make sure the quadratic is in standard form. So again, standard form looks like highest exponent to lowest exponent. So for a quadratic, it looks like this: y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And whenever we solve quadratics, we have to set y equal to 0 because that's what it means to solve a quadratic, as you can see right up here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this equation and I'm going to replace the y with 0. Because again, we're finding the zeros or the roots or the x-intercepts of this quadratic. So after we set it equal to 0, we then need to identify a, b, and c. Remember, a is the one that is always attached to x squared. So in this problem, I don't see anything, so that means that a is equal to 1. B is the one that's always attached to the x term. You always have to bring the sign with it. So our b term here is -5. And lastly, our c term is the constant, the number that stands alone. Here it is -24. Again, do not forget to bring the positive and negative signs with it. Okay, our next step is to plug those values into the formula, always using parentheses. Biggest mistake with the formula is forgetting parentheses. Especially when we have negative numbers, it gets a little confusing. So here's the formula again. Notice that this negative b, the negative right out in front, that is part of our formula. So we have to bring that no matter what. So I kind of set up a template for the formula right here. So the first thing we need to plug in is our b value. So the negative, again, is already outside of our parentheses because that is part of our formula. And our b value is -5. Oops. So you're going to see that double negative. It's really important that you have that double negative, otherwise it's incorrect. In some situations, if b was positive, you'd only have one negative. Okay, inside the parentheses, our next term we have to fill in is this b, the b again. So we're going to plug in, oops, I jumped far, -5 again, squared -4. The next term we need to plug in is our a value. So again, looking up here, our a value is 1. And our b value is -5. And then looking below, we have 2 times a. Again, my a value is 1. So our next step is to simplify one piece at a time. Now this is the part where I feel like we make some mistakes just based on what I've seen in the past years. So like I'm very specific when I say simplify one piece at a time. So what I'm going to do is, just so I don't have to keep creating new equations in Google Docs, I'm just going to copy and paste this equation into the next line, and we can start simplifying it. So I am going to pull up my calculator app. Hopefully you guys have downloaded that app, or you have your graphing calculator at home. Again, to get to your app, you can go to the updates in Algebra 1, and I show a video on how to get the app. You can do the launcher, and that's how you get to your calculator. For some reason, mine just shows up in the bottom now, so that's a good thing. Probably just because I left it open from last time. And I'm just going to put that off to the side. And actually, let's see if I click on that. Yeah, so I'm going to just adjust my pages. So this -5, when we have a double negative, hopefully you guys know that that turns into a positive. Okay, now this is really important. If you're working off of the hard copy, you can see I make a note on this, is when you simplify this piece with the square root, ignore the square root right now. What I want you to do is just type in everything that's underneath the square root, not the 2/1 that highlighted, but the -5 squared minus 4 times 1 times -24. So I'm going to show you in the calculator. You can type all of that in at once. So we've got -5. Always type in your parentheses, squared, minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses negative. Again, do not use the subtraction sign for negatives. That messes it up. It will read it as subtraction. We need that as a -24, and that simplifies to 121. Okay, so I'm going to just erase the inside here. It's actually kind of helpful doing it on a Google Doc with the formula, because you kind of can just replace as you go. And then down here, down in the denominator, 2 times 1 is just 2. Okay, so we are really close to simplifying this now. So now we have to take the square root of 121. Okay, now 121 is a perfect square, so it will come out nice and pretty. So to do the square root, you press second, x squared. We type in our number, 121, and we get 11. So I'm going to, again, replace this, copy and paste, Control C for copy, Control V for paste. And that means I can erase the square root as well. The square root of 121 is not the square root of 11. I see that a lot, so be careful with that. It is just plain old 11. We have to split this equation into 2 separate equations. We have the plus or minus, and that tells us that it can be 5 plus 11 divided by 2, or 5 minus 11 by 2. Divided by 2, excuse me. So what we're going to do, first, we're going to, like I said, we're going to split it into 2 equations. Let's do the plus first. So 5 plus 11 divided by 2. So I'm going to set up a fraction. You don't have to if you can do it in your head, but so 5 plus 11 is 16 over 2. And 16 divided by 2 is equal to 8. Now we have to do the minus. I just did that twice. Yep. 5 minus 11. Struggling here. Okay. Minus 5 minus 11 gives us -6. -6 divided by 2 gives us -3. So our solutions are x equals -3 and x equals 8. So let's just play around with our calculator for a second. I'm going to go back up to our original quadratic. And let's go to y equals and graph the quadratic. We've got x squared minus 5x minus 24. And let's just press graph. You can see the parabola show up on the graph. We can't see the vertex. We could play around with the window, but we're looking for solutions, which means we want to look at where the parabola hits the x-axis. Now, it might not be as clear on your calculators, but you can clearly see that this intersects at -3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's a good way to kind of double check there. All right, so let's take a look at number 2. I'm sorry, the section at the bottom that says now you try. Now, I do recommend just going up and copying, pasting the formula into each table under the problem, because it's just going to be a lot easier to plug things in. So when we're here, again, if you need to refer back to your steps, take a look at the steps on the first page. First step is to make sure that our equation is in standard form, which it is. And then we want to replace our y, I'm just going to do it right in the equation, with a 0. Then we want to identify our a, b, and c values. I don't want it to be bold, so I'm going to unbold it. So the font size is quite large right now, so I'm going to just change that to 12. So a is equal to 1, b is equal to 8, and c is equal to 15. So what I want you to do is pause the video and plug that into your formula right now. All right, check your work with my work. Did you use parentheses? Very important. Copying and pasting. We simplify. So -8 is just -8. So I'll drop the parentheses there after I double check it. Now remember, we are going to type in everything underneath the square root, or sometimes we call that square root a radical. So do not type in the radical or the square root into your calculator, just everything that's underneath it. So we have 8 squared. I'm always using those parentheses. It eliminates any silly little mistakes that you might make. We get 4. So I'm going to erase what's underneath the square root and replace it with the 4. And then we've got 2 times 1, which is just 2. Oops. Okay. Now we simplify that one more step. The square root of 4, you can type that into your calculator if you don't know it offhand, but it is 2, not radical 2 or square root of 2. You'll see the radical, that's why I'm saying that, in the next lesson. And then we're going to split this into 2 separate equations. So we have -8, I always do plus first, plus 2 over 2. So -8 plus 2 is -6. -6 divided by 2 is -3. I skipped writing that step in just because it's a pain in the butt to do this on the Chromebook. Copy and paste. Then we've got to replace this with the minus. -8 minus 2 is -10. -10 divided by 2 is -5. If you want to, you can go to your calculator, type it in, x squared plus 8x plus 15. You might be asking, why can't we just do this in the calculator? Well, sometimes the problem's going to ask you to solve algebraically, which means you have to show work to get credit. Okay, -3 right there and -5 right there. We're good to go. You can also go to your table. Remember, solutions are where y equals 0. So we have to scroll, and I see y equal to 0 when x equals -3 and for -5. Okay, so what I want you to do right now is I want you to try 2 and 3 on your own right now. All right, check your work with my work. I'll scroll up a little bit so you can see number 2. Those were both fractions. Make sure you always put your answer as a simplified fraction. And number 3, we got 3 and -4. And one thing I want to mention before we go to number 4 is that the quadratic formula works with any quadratic. any. So if it says to solve the quadratic, you could always check to see if you can do factoring, check to see if you can do completing the square, but you can always do the quadratic formula with solving quadratics. So if you look at number 4, if I gave this problem to you and I said solve the quadratic, I actually would not recommend you use the quadratic formula, because hopefully you can see this is going to be easier to solve by factoring, because this is a dots factoring method. So you don't need to type this in, but I just want to show you real quick. So we get x plus, 9, x minus 9. Remember, we double bubble, different signs, take the square roots, and then we would make a t-chart, and we would say, okay, x plus 9 equals 0. We solve for that, and we would get negative 9. And then we would have to do the same thing with the other side, and we would get positive 9. That took up 3 lines. Obviously, I didn't show all of my work, and I would want you to, but it's pretty simple. Okay, but you can always do the quadratic formula as well. So we already know our answers should be negative 9 and 9, so that's kind of nice. But we are going to do it by solving using the quadratic formula. Now, the tricky part about this is that there's 2 terms. Okay, where is my B? Because I see my A and my C right now. But I wrote a little hint over here, is think of it as your B value is 0x. Because if we simplify this trinomial, 0x would disappear and become x squared minus 81. So let's find our A, B, and C. A is equal to 1. B, it is not there, therefore it is 0. And C equals negative 81. Okay, I am going to copy and paste. Okay. So again, if you want to copy and paste your original formula with the A's, the B's, the C's, that's fine too. So if you have to refer back to that formula, like I have it memorized because I've been doing this for years, but if you have to go back up to that formula to know what comes first, then do that. So my B value comes first, which is 0, plus or minus B again, minus 4 times A, which is 1, already in there for me, and C, which is negative 81, all over 2 times A, which is 2 times 1, which I already got in there. So again, I'm going to copy and paste. A negative 0, a positive 0, it's just 0. If we add something to it or if we subtract something to it, it doesn't affect anything. So negative 0 can just go away because that's just like having a 0 in front. We don't need it. Still need that plus or minus though. Okay, so using your calculator, typing in 0 squared. I'm not going to type this one in for you on the digital calculator because I'm doing it on my actual calculator. You do not type in the square root. So go ahead and do that on your own. You should get 324. And in the bottom, 2 times 1 is just 2. Let's simplify that square root of 324, which is 18. Now we split it. So we can have a positive 18, so a plus 18, but we really don't need that plus 18. We know it's positive. 18 divided by 2, which gives you to memorize because it is on your reference sheet. But we don't really need that positive in front because we already know it's positive. 18 divided by 2 gives us 9. And then we know the bottom one would just be negative 18 because we would have that minus 18 basically, but nothing to subtract it with. So negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9, which we knew already. And just a note, you can always write your solutions as x equals 9, x equals negative 9. Sometimes they're also written in interval notation. Usually we write the smallest number first. And that just means we're listing those numbers. Okay, and that's all we got for solving problems or solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. If you have questions, make sure you reach out and also be sure to self-assess for today's lesson.